We're very pleased to present several special guests to share advice and inspiration, as I mentioned, on their work in health communication. First, I'd like to welcome our current graduate students from Writing for Health and our hardworking facilitator, Lisa Bluebow. And a welcome to our students who are visiting from Professor Quigley's Healthcare Public Relations class. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks, Professor Quigley, for joining us too. A big welcome to our visiting guests and to any alum who may have popped in, and to our 5 very generous guest speakers. This year marks the 15th anniversary of our graduate program. It was the first online graduate program of its kind when it launched in 2008, thanks to the vision and hard work of co-founders, Professor Steve Quigley and our colleague, Dr. Dominic Screnchi, who I think is also with us tonight. Thanks you guys for being here. And thanks for all your hard work at putting this vision into reality all those years ago, and here we still are. So whether your work is with audiences from the consumer product sector, as a journalist, or managing brand reputation at a media agency, or maybe you're working in nonprofit or in education or in research, we know that health communicators are hard at work behind the scenes and sometimes in front of the camera. So first, let me thank you all for the important work that you do. It has never been a more important time to be a health communicator, and it's so important for our fellow humans. I'm always surprised and really impressed to learn about the many places where you guys are making a difference, as you know, we see up on the screen here. And tonight we'll share some insights from a few areas who are touched by our work. What do you do when you see a need for health communication, but there doesn't seem to be a path defined for the job? Marissa Thiry, a class of 2020 alum and a health communication pro, is in the global nutrition space at Taco Bell. She'll tell us about how she pushed the boundaries there and created her own role. What role does patient storytelling play in the health communicator's future toolbox? To discuss that, I'm very pleased to welcome MSHC candidate Rebecca Handler here tonight to interview special guest. He's a journalist, author, and patient advocate, Ryan Pryor. And finally, what's it like to work at global health media agency Havas Health You? What skills and experience are in demand right now? With us tonight to answer those questions and share some career advice are 2 top hiring managers from Havas, Jeremiah Pinto and Leslie Simpson. When she joined Taco Bell North America in 2016, she was that company's 2nd in-house dietitian, only the 2nd for a big company like that. She recognized the need for nutrition communication, but there really wasn't any clear career path for the work she wanted to do. So through collaboration and with some creative thinking around unmet stakeholder needs, she helped create new communication strategies. I'm pleased to welcome Marissa Thiry to share her story with us.
Esther, that was such a kind introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here with you tonight. As Professor Lee mentioned, I am Marissa Thiry, and I am a dietitian and a product developer and a health communicator at Taco Bell. If I could summarize my career path in really one sentence, it would be go beyond the job description. I've always really loved exploring unique opportunities in nutrition. I've dabbled in pretty much everything over the years, from clinical to community to research, and now in the restaurant industry. And while my nutrition career began well before 2016, my first real experience in health communications was in 2016 when I was working at Weber Shandwick, which is a global PR firm. I was part of the nutrition communications team there, which I sat on a team of registered dietitians that helped craft food messages on behalf of brands and commodity boards. I worked on accounts like milk processors, for those of you who might remember the Got Milk campaign from years ago. I might be dating myself right now. National Pork Board and Panera Bread accounts, really helping craft their food messages to specific audiences or the public. And that was my first real exposure to health communications, and it really piqued my interest. I truly feel there's no better experience of the fundamentals of communication than at an agency. But shortly after I started at Weber Shandwick, an opportunity arose at Taco Bell that I just could not pass up. So as Lee mentioned, I came over to Taco Bell and I was hired in a nutrition and product development role focused on the domestic business. This sat on the food innovation team, not marketing or public relations or communications. My role was really focused on making tacos and burritos a little bit better for you. So I was doing things like reducing sodium in our ingredients, removing artificial colors and flavors, and really just developing craveable, balanced menu options. I did not have really any defined communication responsibilities in the role, but I worked closely with the PR team on how to craft our food story. Around that same time, I knew I had this interest in communications, so I decided to seek external opportunities to pursue that more. I began freelance writing for Food and Nutrition magazine, which is a dietitian-focused or professional-focused outlet run by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And when I started writing for them, I was doing mostly kitchen tool reviews. So they would send me something like a compost bin or a toaster oven. I would use it in my kitchen and I would review it for them in an article. And it was unpaid. The payment was that I got to keep the tool. But it was starting to get me that exposure to communication that I wanted. But I knew there was still more to learn. So about a year after starting at Taco Bell, I began the BU program as well to get my master's. After learning even more about communications through my courses at BU, I applied some of that learning to spearhead the launch of Taco Bell's first ever nutrition stakeholder network. Basically, I put together a business plan, had a massive budget proposal, got it approved, and launched the network. Today, it is certainly my baby. It is a strategic network of 80 plus registered dietitians across the country. We tell them our food story, details of our sodium reduction journey, our path to offering better beverages, and we invite them to push the boundaries, tell us how we can take our work in the future. The key thing here is that nobody asked me to do this. It was certainly not written in my job description. I was just really leaning into my background and my passion to bring something fresh and new to the organization and start to expand my role into more communications work. Around 2020, I started to get some paid assignments from my editor at Food and Nutrition magazine. So by this point, I had proven myself as a strong writer. I was reliable with deadlines, and I assessed their content and realized that there wasn't really a voice covering sustainability topics for the outlet. So I started to pitch a few more topics in that area to my editor, and she accepted them and gave me paid assignments. So to this audience, I was really starting to position myself as a sustainability expert as well. In 2021, I expanded my role at Taco Bell again by creating an internal resource. So I noticed that we were starting to lean into talking about our food a little bit differently. And we were starting to think about claims and language for our food. And I was really the gatekeeper of that information as a nutrition and regulatory professional. So I decided to create this internal resource for the entire organization that basically substantiated every single ingredient on our menu and provided claims and language for each ingredient. It was an absolutely massive undertaking. It took me over a full year to complete. But again, the beauty of a passion project is that nobody is really asking for a deadline. You're working against your own timeline. And this tool really helped even further position myself as a nutrition communications expert internally. Now, my role has expanded to lead work across the globe, not just domestic, in nutrition, sustainability, and product development. But what's more is that I've positioned myself as not only the subject matter expert in these areas to lead projects, but also how we talk about the work. I really am the point person on my team for any external or internal storytelling opportunities around nutrition and sustainability. I do work hand in hand with marketing and PR about how to craft the story and how our brand shows up in this space. And I still do not sit on the marketing or PR team. I'm still on the food innovation team, which has allowed me to continue to be hands-on in the kitchen, developing ingredients and menu items that fit all lifestyles, which is also something I love, but then also how we talk about it. Next slide, please. So with that, if I could just leave everyone with a few pieces of advice. I really think there are a few key things that I've taken away from my career so far. And the first is just to demonstrate your expertise in everyday communications. So I can't tell you how many times I get emails that haven't been proofread or don't use proper grammar or are not written in lay terms. Never underestimate the power of a well-written email. I have been fortunate enough to really hone that skill, largely due to my experience at BU as well as the agency experience. And since then, it's really paid off. I've written emails before that were very concise and clear and that have been forwarded on to the CEO of Taco Bell and even the CEO of Yum, which is our parent company. Second, my advice would be advocating for your skill set. If you are not contributing to communications within your organization, someone else is, and they might need help. So reach out, see if there's a company blog post or articles or internal newsletters that you can contribute to or support. And then lastly, it would be to seek external or supplemental opportunities. So whether that's freelancing or seeking engagements, even if it's not your dream opportunity out of the gate, like perhaps kitchen tool reviews, it might still help you get to where you want to be in the long run. Boosting your resume with as many opportunities as possible, I promise you, will only make you a stronger communicator overall. Next slide, please. So with that, I will leave you with my contact information, and Professor Lee, I'm not sure if we have time for questions or if we can take them at the end.
We do. Anybody have questions? Well, I'll start. I have one. This is maybe a non-health comm one, but what was your favorite appliance that you reviewed? Did you have one?
Oh, that's a great question. I think my favorite is I have a
oh, that was a curveball, sorry.
I have a combined toaster oven / air fryer that I reviewed that I still use in my kitchen today. Caroline, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you. And I'm so sorry that I'm not able to immediately turn on the camera. I'll have to just fix that. Thank you so much. Out of curiosity, were you able to define the tone of voice, or were you given a brand document that defined the tone of voice for you?
I think it's a joint effort. I think Taco Bell has a very defined voice. We're a little bit cheeky. We're kind of that, we call it the Taco Bell wink. So that's definitely already defined as a brand. I adopt that certainly, and I think there's a fine line to walk when you're talking about claims and things like that that can be a little bit more rough around the edges, that you'll want to still make sure that it's in the defined voice.
Thank you. And just a follow up to that, because I'm very interested in the master's. Do they teach in the master's program how to navigate those fine lines so that one does not hurt our political relationships in the organization?
I will pass that probably to Professor Lee. I don't know that I had the exact, I think a lot of the skills in the program from my experience are applicable and translatable. I don't know if the exact experience of like claims language in your brand was provided, but I think so many of the skills are translatable. Professor, do you have anything else to add to that?
I would just say that we really emphasize writing for your audience, knowing who your audience is and writing with purpose for that specific audience. And so in that respect, your internal comms would be different than your external comms. So yes, to answer your question, yes, we do, not specifically with brand guidelines, but that's a very a great suggestion and a great question, because working internally, definitely you have to follow brand guidelines and style guidelines. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it does. And it gives me confidence that there's consideration for how to navigate that, especially when we're moving into environments where there's an omni-channel approach to listening to the customer. And when we're moving to social media, obviously Taco Bell is a very well-defined brand. A lot of the other smaller brands are not as well defined. So that's where my question comes from. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you for the question. We have one from Molly. She asks, how did you pitch your skills in order to freelance for those initial unpaid writing assignments?
That's a great question. I believe for Food and Nutrition magazine, when I started writing for them, they had a blurb on their website about seeking contributors and how to pitch. I know way back when there was a resource called HARO. I don't know if that still exists, but it was called Help a Reporter Out, HARO. That was kind of a listserv with topics for opportunities for freelancing. But and certainly online, I guarantee you there's a ton of emails out there about how you can write a strong pitch email to an editor if you are kind of cold calling them or cold writing them, so to speak. So definitely would reference those to write a strong pitch note. But once you get a relationship built with an editor, it's a lot easier to keep that communication open and understand what kind of topics they're looking for as well. HARO still exists. Great. There you go.
Yes, it does. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes. Leslie, is that you?
That's me. So I'm sure this is probably on other people's minds, because it was the first thing that I thought about when I saw who we were speaking with tonight, that we have the word nutrition and we have Taco Bell. You've been there for 6+ years. What I'd love to know is what drew you to working for Taco Bell versus any other company that you could do this for? What have you seen in the last recent years, especially in terms of their nutrition, the changes and would you call their food healthier for you? Versus, I mean, you talked about craveable, which I think is something that we think about when we think about fast food. Is why we are drawn to it, because it's a craveable item. But you know, I can't imagine that you as a nutritionist are not asked the question, why Taco Bell? Why Taco Bell?
How much time do we have? No. This is my favorite question. So I started at Taco Bell in undergrad as an intern, which is a whole nother part of my career journey I didn't get into from time. I actually got that job again, going beyond the job description, but I sat next to the right person on a plane and ended up as an intern, which is great. But it completely changed my career trajectory. I, at the time, assumed that I was going to go into sports dietetics. I was an athlete and very passionate about sports. And then I interned at Taco Bell and I loved it. And I realized for the first time in my dietetics career that there's so many misconceptions about the food industry out there. There's so many voices, especially now in the influencer world, on what is healthy and what is good for you and what are processed foods and things like that, but it's not necessarily based in science. So I became very, very passionate about spreading that word of, hey, actually, we have really good quality ingredients and here's why. And then also working from within. Like we have 7,000 plus restaurants across the US alone, and then of course in other countries, and we feed millions of people every day. So if you think about it fundamentally, don't you want dietitians working at those companies? Don't you want
Oh,
them?
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's like, I want to be working to create improvements and reduce a little bit of sodium here and reduce a little bit of sugar out of our beverage lineup, and make sure that there's balanced options for everyone, because healthy doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. For some people, it means they only have $5 to buy a meal. So what can we provide them that gives them the most bang for their buck, that's going to fill them up, but also make them feel good and is nourishing and balanced? So that's really where my passion is. And I fell in love with Taco Bell, and I explored a lot of opportunities early in my career, but I always wanted to return. And I was fortunate enough to get that opportunity when a second headcount opened up. But I absolutely love it. And I can't picture myself anywhere else now.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for teeing me up with a great question there.
That's great. Thank you. And Marissa, thank you so much for sharing all your insights and your experience, and giving us a little look behind the curtain at what it's like to work in the nutrition comms space. We have a good number of nutritionists that come into the program, and so I hope that a couple are with us tonight and are inspired by your story. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Those of you who are wrapping up the writing course right now are all too familiar with the challenges and the power of storytelling. Earlier today, I read this on our class discussion board. Storytelling has been a part of our lives and culture from the time human life began. It brings a voice to the voiceless. Thanks to Raina Cordell, you really nailed it, and I could not think of a better way to introduce our next guests. Many of you, like students before you, probably found your way into this field because of personal experiences, maybe a parent or a family member or your own health experience motivated you to take some action. That personal motivation is shared by our next two guests. Rebecca Handler is a current MSHC candidate here at BU. She's the marketing and comms manager at Open Medicine Foundation, a nonprofit organization that leads collaborative research across 7 research centers worldwide. For those of you unfamiliar with Open Medicine Foundation, its focus is on research for multi-system, chronic, complex diseases. And a relative newcomer to that list of complex diseases is long COVID. Through her work, Rebecca met and later interviewed journalist, documentarian, and patient advocate Ryan Pryor. And at the start of the semester, Rebecca emailed me saying, "Hey, I have someone who our students might like to hear from." What an understatement. Ryan is a former CNN journalist and producer, a 5-time recipient of Stanford Medicine's ePatient Scholarship, a writer, co-director of the documentary Forgotten Plague, and the author of The Long Haul, a very moving, compelling book on long COVID. It tells the life-changing stories of patients turned advocate in their search for answers on long COVID. It's a club that Ryan himself would become a member of. Here to talk about his story, our craft, and how he turned 75,000 fact-checked words into his publisher with characters he believes in. I'm pleased to welcome Ryan Pryor and Rebecca Handler.
Thank you so much for that introduction. That was great. And Raina, that is a fantastic quote. Thanks for sharing that. So I first connected with Ryan, I believe almost a year ago. I think we first connected at Open Medicine Foundation. And I've actually had the pleasure to watch Ryan's work from the sidelines even well before I worked at Open Medicine Foundation. So the reason I found myself in this field is very personal. I'm also a person with ME/CFS, which is commonly known as chronic fatigue syndrome. And I watched Ryan's work in the form of documentaries, articles that he's published, patient advocacy in politics. So I'm just really honored to be able to talk more about Ryan's story today and this new book, The Long Haul. So thank you so much for joining, Ryan. So I wanted to start and talk a little bit about your new book. This is an amazing feat that you've just published this. So in this book, you tell the stories of individuals with long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome. So this is obviously really difficult because it's dealing with a lot of very emotional situations. This is a very complex disease with no cure and no treatments. So how did you approach the process of gathering and sharing these stories, and what impact do you hope that they have on readers?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction, by the way. But a couple of different ways of seeing the start of how I was covering COVID as a science writer for CNN. And so a lot of our standard playbook would be that, if something has happened in the world, especially if something bad has happened to people, reach out to the people affected and interview them and tell their story. And that, from one point of view, it's really that simple. But there's a larger context here where I was a chronic illness patient myself, and had a post-viral syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis, or chronic fatigue syndrome. So we know that all viruses cause this disease, and SARS-CoV-2 was no different, but because this was going to be a disease that was going to affect hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. We knew that we would have a huge onslaught of post-viral illness as well. So I was watching for that early on, and that some support groups, the Body Politic and the Patient-Led Research Collaborative, emerged. And so as a reporter, it was easy for me to send requests out to those organizations to ask them for patients who would speak with me. And then later, once I got the book deal, I built a survey, and we had about 75 responses from patients writing in English. And since I wanted to do this as a global or international scope, we had 75 responses from people writing to me in Spanish. And the second chapter of the book has a lot of patient stories. So we ended up using about 20 out of those 150. But a lot because I knew the general trajectory of basically the story is that someone gets a virus and then never gets better. It was easy to construct questions that were going to highlight that patient journey, because it was a journey I'd gone through myself. And so that was probably the simple way to tell that story. It was a huge story with international scope, and so I had to figure out ways to streamline it and to get the nuggets I wanted to tell the story I wanted.
I can imagine, being a patient yourself, you already were coming with a sort of sense of empathy, this heightened sense of empathy, having lived through this. And in this program, I know a lot of the students that are here with me tonight, we're in this class right now, we're talking a lot about empathy and how this should be incorporated into health communication. So in the very opening chapter of your book, you actually talk a lot about grace and empathy. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate more about that, why these two things are so important to those of us who are telling patient stories, which I assume a lot of us in our day jobs, we might already be incorporating that, or we might be doing that after this program.
Yeah, I don't really see any other way of interacting with the world except through trying to portray and embody grace and empathy. And it's really the way I would want to be portrayed, and I would want to portray all of my subjects with dignity and poise, and to really show their best self and to bring out their character, their internal self. How do I ask questions that bring out a full-bodied individual? And because gaslighting is very common in these diseases, or people feel misunderstood, that they're frequently doubted that they have a disease at all, because there's issues with the underlying science and figuring out how to get the right kind of biomarkers to diagnose and treat the disease, which is a lot of what Rebecca is working on with Open Medicine Foundation. When you operate in the environment when people aren't being believed, as a patient, as a sufferer myself, it was one of the most important things I can do just as a is to give people a forum to tell their stories and to listen. Many people feel that they're just not being listened to, and as a patient, I can ask them questions in a way that aligns with their actual worldview and really can complete their sentences for them a lot of the time. But I would do that for any subject, and it doesn't have to be a healthcare subject. And whether I'm interviewing activists for the Black Lives Matter protests, or interviewing a candidate on a campaign trail, I want to give every character an opportunity to be their best self, and I think that's the right way to act.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned that just now, these health crises are often very much misunderstood by the general public. ME/CFS has been for decades. It's called chronic fatigue syndrome. That's kind of come with a stigma. Long COVID, of course, we don't know a lot about it. It's still evolving. So as a health communications expert, how do you approach the task of engaging and educating the general public about complex health issues like ME/CFS, like long COVID? And what strategies have you found to be particularly effective?
So yeah, so it is true that this is a complex multi-system illness. It's true that long COVID causes 203 unique symptoms, and it's true that it affects 10 different body systems, and it's true that the science is still emerging. But at the same time, it's true that the historical context is that this has been going on for centuries. That is not really any different with SARS-CoV-2 than it was with Epstein-Barr, or with Ebola, or the first SARS virus, or with the 1918 flu. That we know that long-term effects from viruses is to be expected, and so then we understand that. The core story here is that people got sick and they stayed sick. It's that simple. And we can get into all kinds of discussions about metabolomic profiling, or cytokines, or immune dysregulation, or dysautonomia, or whether this specific virus infiltrate neurons? Can it get into the central nervous system? They're super interesting questions to ask. There's certainly really incredible questions you can ask about how to innovate around diagnostics, and these are all wonderful things to talk about. But I think at the core of it, it's just that a human being got a disease and they're not getting better, and if we don't figure out ways to help them get better, or figure out ways to serve them through Social Security disability, or through Medicare benefits, it's going to have a dramatic effect on the economy. It already is having a huge effect on the economy. A lot of the labor crisis and the labor shortage is caused by COVID long haulers. And there's a study from Harvard saying that it's going to cause a $3.7 trillion impact to the US economy. So about the same amount as the Great Recession. Those are all true too. But what matters here is that a lot of people got sick, and we have to figure out ways to help them. And I think staying true to that basic human story, and that it doesn't take more than a second or third grade education to understand that part. And I think that's how we get the message across.
You had a great quote about that in your book. I think you mentioned something like, behind every statistic is a human face and a human story. And I think that's so important for us to continuously consider that to draw attention to things. Yes, sometimes we want to state a statistic about the economic impact, but behind all of that is just such human suffering, and the importance of kind of explaining the face behind those numbers. And I think you do a really good job of that in your book. So another thing that we often talk about, I know in the class that I'm currently in, we've talked about this a lot, but it's how do we simplify this very complex medical information? You just kind of mentioned cytokines, immune profiling, stuff like that. So a lot of these complex, almost intimidating terms, it can be difficult to thread the line, I think, between having a very formal tone and having a conversational and approachable one. So I'm wondering if you have any tips or tricks on how to communicate health information in a way that's easy for everyone to understand.
Yeah, and so people will generally probably aren't going to remember statistics, but they are going to remember stories and anecdotes in particular. So at CNN, we always talk about it as like an anecdotal lead. You're gonna write a news story, and it might be tied to a new study that came out in a medical journal, and that's great, and that's newsworthy, and that's substantive and backed by data. But in order to actually make this stick, you're going to have to find a person that this happened to. So you're going to find patients, and this is really what I was so passionate about doing across all different diseases. And long COVID is one of them, but I would do this with phantom limb syndrome, or people with migraines, people with depression, and a lot of the same experience of human suffering happens regardless of what the actual diagnosis is. That it's just someone who's sick, and it might be a different part of their body that got messed up. But I think a lot of people just want to be heard, and they want to be treated, and they want to not be discounted, and to definitely not be bankrupted by their illness. And obviously that happens in a lot of different situations. So you find a character, you figure out how to get into their psyche, and then you're going to you want to start the story with that, and you can get into the science in the middle of it. And ideally, you come back to the same character, or maybe to a different character at the end, to really put human faces on it. And it can be difficult to find patients who actually embody that particular disease that you're writing about, but oftentimes you go through support groups to find that can be one of the easiest ways. And yeah, I think that, and I'm trying to think of a couple of stories that really stuck out to me from COVID long haulers who I wrote about in the book. And one of them was named James McMillan, and he was an inmate at a jail in Texas. And I thought this was one of the harder interviews to get. And I happened to be a friend of a friend with him, and he could call out from the prison. I couldn't call him; he could call me from the prison, and he explained to me his story. But there had been an outbreak in his prison, and he got in COVID. There was no way to stop from getting COVID, and he'd done his best to barricade himself in there into a room so he could quarantine and isolate. But ultimately, he got COVID, and his main outlet was exercising, which is what a lot of people do, is spend a lot of time in prison lifting weights. And what happens with long COVID is people have a post-exertional malaise. They have a failure to recover from exercise. So basically his main reason for existence, his main hobby in prison was to work out. And he found that he used to work out 3 hours a day. And after he got COVID, he spent about a year where he couldn't work out for more than about 20 minutes. And that was decimating to him. And so he needed that in order to stay sane, really. And so it's so common in so many patients to get a secondary depression because they can't do what they're normally used to doing. And so because they're sick, they also get depressed. And I just thought it was particularly poignant. And that, this is just one of, dozens that are in the book. But James, couldn't work out. And I think that was particularly severe for someone who's in prison. And so long COVID is happening in every part of society. But I think prisons are one of the hardest places to do reporting.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that you were able to incorporate that perspective, especially with a global health crisis, like this mass disabling event, because that's what you call it in the book. And that's what it has become. And it affects every part of our society, even prisons. And I thought that was really important that you included that perspective, because this disease, it doesn't discriminate at all. And that kind of brings us perfectly to my next question for you, Ryan. It's how can compassionate storytelling, like you did with this story, be a part of the future for health communication?
Yeah, and I'm consistently reminded of my own journey, studying philosophy in undergraduate, and a lot of the what we're after as human beings is to try to seek out the good, the true, and the beautiful. So Aristotle talks about this as ethos, logos, and pathos. So ethos is an ethical appeal. Logos means an appeal to logic. Pathos is talking about emotions. So as you're writing, just always keep in mind, ethos, logos, and pathos as 3 tools in your tool set. And every story that you write ought to have a personal story or an appeal to ethics first. So that it should have a substance, a logical substance, and then emotionally it should have a human story behind it. And You're not going to change hearts and minds with any particular one of those, but all three of them together might appeal to different segments of the population. So just keep in mind that there's different methods that are going to work for different audiences, and as much as possible, you want to be using all of them all the time. And then the most famous book about chronic fatigue syndrome is called Osler's Web, and that's about Sir William Osler was a famous medical educator at Johns Hopkins University in the 19th century. And he says this really, really important quote that listen to the patient and he will tell you what the disease is. And in this case of ME/CFS and long COVID and a whole host of hard to treat chronic complex illnesses, listening to the patient really is the most useful way to diagnose the disease. That's for doctors or for scientists, and not just for journalists, not just for people who are trying to tell our story, but for people who are actually trying to get them better. That taking a patient history is the most important thing that doctors can do, and it's really the most important thing we can do as writers and communicators. So in this, we're operating in a much more democratized environment in the 21st century. There's unprecedented ways for people to get their views across on social media. So there's unprecedented ways for journalists and others to contact them and to bring out those stories. So that, but yeah, I think a lot of these are just timeless ideas about how to communicate well. The logos, ethos, and pathos, and I could go on, but that would be the one thing I would want to impart on people.
I love that idea of layering all three to tell a story more effectively. So I think that's a great tip that we could all keep in our toolkits. I think that positions us pretty well, actually, if we need it, if we wanted to have any Q&A. Professor Lee will help with that. But I think, Ryan, you just made so many important points. And thank you again for being here tonight and sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank you both for an excellent interview and bringing the compassion to the work that you do. Ryan, thank you for the years of research and the courage to bring these stories to us. And Rebecca, thank you for all your work and for arranging this moving interview tonight. But I'd like to see what questions our audience might have. Kyle?
Hi, I'm actually Rebecca's fiance, and I was introduced to the subject through her. But I want to be present for this because I love being exposed to this, and I didn't know about it beforehand. But my question to Ryan, and also Rebecca, and just to throw it out there, in a medical system that focuses on specialties, how does an illness that affects multiple systems get addressed and improved? Otherwise, maybe how does an individual build a solid clinical care team?
Rebecca, do you want to go first?
Sure, that's a great question. And there's so much to say about that. And I think we deal with that a little bit in this program when it comes to like health literacy, because a lot of the times as a chronic patient, when we're not sure there is no one test to diagnose chronic fatigue syndrome. And in my experience, it's involved a lot of research online and a lot of doing your own homework, and it's nitty and it's gritty and it's really hard it can be really difficult. And I think from my personal experience, building a care team often comes from doing a lot of your own home research, which can be difficult because I know a lot of the times it has to deal with coming from a place of health literacy. Like, what do we need? What specialists might be best to address certain issues, and how can we communicate to our care team about what's going on? And I think that's a really difficult situation with these conditions specifically, because we're up against a lot of invalidation from a medical community that's been historic. I think ME/CFS has had trouble with medical recognition for a while. So when it comes to building a care team, I think it is a real struggle. Ryan, maybe you could speak to that a little bit as well.
Yeah, and just to say that it's very difficult for people to do this, and oftentimes people have to travel out of state to get a doctor who's knowledgeable about this disease, because there's probably only about a dozen physicians in the country who are able to treat ME/CFS. But for the broader question of assembling multi-system or a team of experts who can actually treat a disease that spans the gap of, it's partly infectious disease, it's partly neurology, it's partly rheumatology. Sometimes there's cardiac implications. There's I don't even know how many other specialists I've been to. Psychiatry, I've been to rheumatology, I've been to endocrinology, and every one of them is going to say, okay, well, you've got a slight, very small issue from endocrinology standpoint. Maybe I'm finding something from a neurology standpoint, but people fail to see the whole person, and they only each specialist can only see their specific subset or their particular organ system, and part of this is building a new paradigm for how we think about medicine, and using human-centered design, and understanding that unless we think about being patient-centered rather than being either disease-centered or I would say bureaucracy-centered. Practically, it's like each of these different silos, and that can work for insurance reimbursement, but it does not work for people who are just sick and they're trying to get better. So just as a really simple answer to the question, I think human-centered design as a framework for thinking, as applied across the whole healthcare system, is something that we need to do at a system level. I don't know exactly how any individual gets through it, except through just going through the school of hard knocks and just getting ping-ponged around, but being a ferocious advocate for yourself, and knowing that your own health and your own story are your own North Star.
And I'll just add to that. That's a great, that was a really great explanation of that. I think also in healthcare, we're seeing more trends towards value-based care. I know that's something we talked about a little bit in a previous class here at this program, a little bit about health systems, because I think, we have to talk about, when we talk about a question like this, we have to think about the system in which, the healthcare system in which we live, because that's implicated in everything, whether or not we could get approval to see specialists, right? So I do think in the next coming years, there is more of a trend towards patient-centric care and value-based care, as they call it, which means really looking at the holistic person and focusing more on a holistic approach to healthcare and treatment of these chronic diseases. So that is a great question.
I'll tell one more quick story here, is that it's not just patients who become victims within this system, but as many doctors who are very burnt out and who they would love to spend more time with patients, but if they're only going to be reimbursed for 5 or 10 minute appointments, the doctors are also victims within this broader scope. So one of the next things I'll be doing is I'll be writing a column for Psychology Today called Patient Revolution. And when the editor came to me and wanted me to write this, she sent me an article that had really changed her life, that she wrote about a couple of years ago, and it was about physician burnout. So it's not just about patients being gaslit, but it's about physicians being burnt out, and a lot of different humans are not doing well within the system. So when I say patient-centered healthcare, but it's also like human-centered design, and that applies to all the different stakeholders who need to be seen and heard.
And Molly in the chat says, I read that ME/CFS isn't taught in many medical school programs. It'll be interesting to see how more awareness may lead to curriculum changes. That is a great point, Molly, and it really starts with that. It starts with medical education, and that is one of the biggest problems. It's just been a gap where it's been left out. I think long COVID has brought that to the surface. It's being talked about more, how can we avoid it? But unfortunately, you still see many doctors now who might still be unaware of long COVID. I think it really does start at the medical school level, getting people understanding of it. I think that's kind of what the work I do is at Open Medicine Foundation. We actually just last year created a medical education program where we're working on continuing medical education courses for doctors, for physicians, to kind of relearn what they knew about it. So we're first starting with breaking down stigma. That's unfortunate, right? Because we're not just teaching about the disease itself. We're trying to teach people how to unlearn potential stigmas that they might have. Ryan, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I was going to highlight that the work that OMF is doing to aid in physician education is really, really important. And because it would be getting it into medical schools is a complicated thing. And one of the things after my documentary Forgotten Plague came out in 2015, one of my goals was to run a medical fellowship program to educate first or second year medical school students about the disease. And so I learned a bunch about how to influence medical curricula. And one of the things I learned is just that it's extremely difficult because so many different disease groups are trying to insert themselves. And if a doctor graduates from medical school and they've spent, even one day learning about a particular disease, or if they've simply seen like one or two patients with a certain disease, there's thousands of diseases out there. So that it's a good thing if they manage to see, like a multiple sclerosis patient at some point in their training. So getting ME/CFS in there was, very tricky. But yeah, obviously very necessary. And I think I'm seeing it, especially across the lay press, which would be Time Magazine or The Atlantic or CNN, all the way on down, that ME/CFS is all over those articles about long COVID. And basically almost like every other article about long COVID will probably mention ME/CFS. So I think that's a good indicator of the fact that the change is happening across the system.
Absolutely. Carolina.
Thank you. I really appreciate this conversation. I'm curious to the point regarding the value-based care. I've noticed that health plans have teams that focus on improving their Medicare star numbers and ratings. And I'm wondering if you feel like, if you guys think that innovation will only come because the government has instituted a star rating to then pressure health plans to improve care outcomes. I've seen health plans particularly have designated teams. So I'm also seeing that they're not necessarily behaving in this value-based care way across the board. It's like specific to teams to meet specific numbers. And so I'm just wondering what you guys know about, like, do we have hope that value-based care is possible, or especially because of how the Affordable Care Act changed the payment system, or do we have a really hard battle ahead?
Ryan, do you have any?
Yeah, no, I'll give you, I can't profess to know a lot about value-based care, but here's something I do know about is like, it's difficult to get the business model to work for complex chronic diseases. And so figuring out how to build a team and building a clinic that can somehow take insurance. And so getting the billing codes for long COVID was a huge political battle, and that is now complete. And so part of that is just making sure that they can be reimbursed in the first place for post-COVID conditions. And then another thing that so I'm serving as a startup advisor for a biotech startup that's doing long COVID clinics, and the CEO of that company is just absolutely convinced that the only way to make the business model work is through virtual first care. And then another way to make the business model work is having a specific algorithm that doctors can follow, a flow chart, a set of steps that they can follow. Because a lot of times doctors are afraid to try something new because they'll get sued, or the patient might be damaged, or they just aren't quite sure what they're doing. So getting a flow chart or algorithm optimized that they can follow, that'll do really well within the insurance system. And then make it's difficult getting this virtual first care reimbursed by Medicare, but I do believe that that's the future of medicine. And so that those are a couple ways that I think that within the how do we innovate around the current system so that these clinics can operate in the black, because most of them just lose money, and they hemorrhage cash because they have to spend so much time seeing patients, and it's only the wealthiest patients can afford to pay for these long visits out of pocket.
I
Thank you,
mentioned, oh,
Oh, so sorry. Go ahead.
oh, no, thank you. And thank you both. I mentioned at the top of the hour how I never cease to be amazed at where health communicators work and the work that we do and where it's going. And you've given us so much to think about in what's up ahead and the future of healthcare and where our work will be needed and where our voices can be heard. And we'll be watching out for Patient Revolution for your work up ahead. Did I get that right?
You did. I will send a link to it in the chat.
Please.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we had a question. Can you please share the name of the startup, Ryan?
Yeah, the startup is named COVID Blue Health. It is in stealth mode, and I'm going to send you, I will put in the link in the chat, a different startup that is very similar called Rhythm, which is a little further along, that does a lot of the same stuff, and is, I think, very innovative in their virtual complex chronic disease, virtual health space, and they're part of Y Combinator, like a major startup accelerator in Silicon Valley. So I'll add that one in there also.
Thank you. Wonderful. So I want to just thank you both again, and I wish we had more time for questions, but we do have we have other guests that we're going to move along to. But if anybody has questions for Ryan or Rebecca, please put them in the chat, and if we can't get to them after we're finished, I'm happy to email them and get an answer for you. Havas Health You is a global media agency, and I believe the largest in the health and wellness space. I think that's correct.
Yep.
Thank you. In 2022, Fortune named Havas Health You a best workplace in advertising and marketing. I can't think of two better people to get career advice from in these uncertain times than our next two friends. Here to talk about what it's like to work at Havas, job opportunities, and how to get your foot in the door. I'm pleased to welcome Jeremiah Pinto from New Jersey tonight and his colleague, Leslie Simpson in Boston.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
My partner, Leslie, and I, we co-lead talent acquisition for all of North America for Havas Health You, which is part of the Havas network. And what we do is we specialize in health communication and advertising for health and wellness. We do a lot of pharmaceutical advertising. In fact, speaking of COVID, we helped, or one of our clients is the Pfizer COVID vaccine. So we helped launch that, what was that, 2 years ago, maybe at this point. Yeah, let's tell you a little bit more about what's going on. So our mission is to be the world's best company at creating meaningful connections using creativity, media, and innovation to inspire healthier lives. It is a group of people that are very passionate about healthcare, right? I mean, the people that work here care about other people's lives and quality of life. And I know you're saying, oh, it's advertising, right? You know, advertising, it's like cookies and stuff. Yeah, if you want to advertise that, go ahead. But it's not meaningful to the people that work here, right? So, because healthcare impacts everybody's lives. So it's very easy to have examples in your day-to-day of how healthcare, or of healthcare, frankly. So anyway, so I'm going to kick it over to Leslie to talk about who we work with.
So we are a full service healthcare agency, which means that we pretty much cover the gamut of healthcare, whether it's HCP, which is marketing to the healthcare provider, or DTC, which is you and I, the consumer. We work with large pharmaceutical and healthcare brands, both in the US and globally. You can see some of the things that we offer, which is strategy, med ed, managed markets, production, account service, editorial, the list just goes on and on and on. And, you know, what, to kind of piggyback on what Jeremiah was saying is that, you know, I've worked in advertising almost all of my career as a talent acquisition specialist, and it's been the last 5 years. I'm actually celebrating this month my 5th year at Havas Health You. And it wasn't until I joined Havas that I realized what I had been missing from working in advertising. I love the industry. It's I love the creativity. I love the thinking outside the box and just doing cool stuff. But there is a certain point when, you know, to you know, sort of look at the cookie analogy, is there's only so much excitement or meaning that goes behind it. But when you're working with individuals who've chosen to move into this lane, it really is a chosen field. And I think it was earlier that was somebody was talking about, I forget which one of you were saying this, Rebecca or Ryan, but in terms of, you know, what is the, people usually have a story. And I could tell you, if I sat down with the 7,000 people at Havas Health You, almost everybody has a relatable story, whether it's personal with themselves or with a loved one or a friend who has gone through something in their lives where their health was impacted, and it has shifted their mentality of what they want to do. So yes, we are advertising, but the care and concern and humanity that goes into the work we do in every department really is quite extraordinary. This is just kind of a list of, if you want to go into advertising and you want to work for a full service agency, where can you go? Account service, which is very client facing. You're working with the day-to-day brand clients. This is a very, I would say, for somebody that wants to do that, you really have to enjoy being around people a lot of the time. Project management is more of the behind the scenes, medical, planning, digital production, art, copy, the list goes on. But there's really almost every which way you can pivot what you do within, you know, your degrees and when you graduate, to really make it work within this industry.
So why pharma? I think we probably answered this a couple times, but it's the humanity, right? It's the relatability. Everybody has examples of their life where diseases or illness, and pharma, I mean, our clients literally save people's lives. You know, we have one of our drugs, just to give you an example, is a drug that's given to premature babies that have respiratory issues. I mean, this drug literally saves premature babies. It's incredible, right? You know, and then you put that up against, like, I don't know, traveling advertising. Again, like I said before, it's what impacts you, and pharma is very impactful for us. Also, let's be honest. I mean, right now, pharma and healthcare are huge, right? There's a lot of opportunity within pharma and healthcare. It's a very desirable background. As I'm talking to everybody here that's in school for healthcare to some degree, you will know. I mean, if you have a background in healthcare and pharma and advertising, you are very desirable. You will always have a job. You'll always have an opportunity out there, because there's a lot of companies out there looking for people that are creative, that are go-getters. So I love pharma. I've been in it. I've been in healthcare and pharma my entire career, and I cannot imagine getting out of this space. So that's why pharma.
And then what are we looking for? You know, I'm sure when you graduate, it's a very daunting task to know that you and all the other graduates are competing for the same jobs. I think to go into pharma advertising, well, first thing I would say is that you have to have a curiosity and a desire to be around creative. That's not anything that will ever be lost. What we do is we do marketing campaigns. So you have to be able to say, I'm interested in the sciences or the healthcare, but I want to do something that's a little bit more fun. or something that's a little bit more outside of what I pictured when I decided to move into the healthcare space. But what we're mostly looking for, and I think especially from a junior level, entry level roles, is people that are passionate and that they want to be there for the right reasons. There's no shortage of jobs, and there's no shortage of opportunity to grow, to have a successful career, to make great money, to be able to afford all the things that you want to do throughout your life. But you have to love it. You have to love working in this industry, or you will never be completely satisfied or successful in what we're looking for in candidates. And I think that, first and foremost, Jeremiah had pointed out, healthcare is everywhere, even in consumer. When you're talking about the mattresses you sleep on, the shoes you put on your feet, the food that you eat every day, the vacations that you travel to, it really all boils down to taking care of yourself. And I think that especially now, healthcare is, and COVID, really did a pretty terrific job of highlighting this, for better or for worse. But there's never been a more shining halo over the healthcare industry, for good and for bad. And people need to understand that it's everywhere and it's a part of your life, and you can either be part of the story and the solution, or you can, be somebody that's a naysayer and realize that regardless, it will affect you and those around you.
If I can just add to that too, about this industry going into advertising, I mean, there's definitely a stigma that advertising is fun and it's creative, and it really is, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of long hours. It's hard. It's very, very, very fast paced. You have to be tenacious. You have to be savvy. You have to want to be in this industry, because if you come in this because you're like, oh, that sounds interesting, sounds fun, you're not going to last. You've got to really want to do this. And, everybody that makes it through this has that bit of flexibility to pivot and work on different things at one time. And you have to be very organized. So anyway, those are some of the qualities that we're looking for as well. You can go to the next slide. Actually, I think that's it, right?
I think that's it.
Okay, cool. All right, 10 minutes.
Good night. Thank you, everybody. No, I'm just kidding.
Does anybody have any questions?
Martina has raised her hand.
Great.
Good evening. First of all, thanks for this wonderful presentation. I have a question that has been on my mind for a lot of time, because I'm also in advertising and I'm also in healthcare advertising, let's say. So I think pharma is a topic that has been quite controversial, especially in recent years.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how can this be addressed with incoming talent in the health comms field in general, and with current players within the field? Because I believe we all ask ourselves some questions with regards to ethics sometimes.
If I'm understanding you, what you're saying is that the controversy over how ethical pharma companies are, and is it something that we struggle with?
Yes, I think so, because since this is a broad topic, and
yeah, no, it's a very broad topic, and it's a very, I think that I will say that prior to working in this area of marketing and advertising, I, like a lot of people, you think of pharma, then you think of big pharma, then you think of companies like Purdue and OxyContin and all the just the disgrace of being about money and only money, and that's true. But the way I guess I look at it this way is that there's a lot of bad companies in a lot of different fields everywhere. And for every bad pharma company, there's hundreds of amazing ones. We have the privilege of working with, not just, as Jeremiah had said, launching the COVID-19 vaccine as well as the mRNA flu. But working with, for instance, in Boston, because of our location to Kendall Square, which has got so many biomedical companies working in the rare disease space and doing some of these launching some of these drugs that have populations of 700 people worldwide, which is a pinprick on the top of a pin. And, when you hear these stories and you see these companies that are putting money into research and development and the science that goes behind it, and, looking at, I could talk forever about all the different therapeutic areas in the disease states we touch, whether it's, high science with oncology, whether it's science light, when you think of something like chronic cough, but they're all about helping individuals live a better life. And from where we sit, we see the results of this. We see the brands that we're working with come out onto market, and we hear the stories of real people that are living a better, more successful life, or lives have been saved because of these pharma companies. So I always, say to people, just be very careful to not lump every company into the same category, because, ethos for one company may be very different than it is for another, and they shouldn't be attached as the same.
And just to add to that too, pharma companies, let's be real about what they do, right? They develop drugs to help people, and they make money. Let's not beat around the bush.
And they
But
make
one of
money.
the things, they make money. They make money, right? What company doesn't make money? Or at least try to make money anyway. But one of the things that's really interesting about a lot of these companies that you may or may not know about is they do a lot of non-branded sites, right? So for example, let's just take COVID, right? Obviously, Pfizer has the COVID-19 drug. They have two websites. They have a website that's tailored towards the professionals, which is very science jargon focused. And then they have the ones that are tailored towards the patients, which are, easier to understand and read. And then what they'll do is they'll do these non-branded, where they build websites just to learn about the disease state itself, right? It's about building, and they'll build communities of people that are impacted. Maybe COVID's not the great one. Let's say oncology, right? Let's say, or MS. They'll build communities of people that are going through the same exact thing at the same time. So that way they can build, they can share their stories and feel that they have people that are dealing with similar things at the same time. So not everything pharma does is great. No lie. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. But at the end of the day, if you can really boil it down to them trying to at least save lives to some degree, or at least make people have a better quality of life, it does make our job a lot easier, right? Like I said, a drug that saves premature babies is very impactful to me. Selling Oreo cookies, not so much. So that's, it's for everybody else to, decide how you want to take that.
Absolutely.
point.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Martina, thank you for that question. We have a question from Natalia. She asks, any tips for students making a career shift from the clinical side to communications?
Yeah. Look at medcoms, medical communication. There's copy editing, copywriting, medical writing. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities and areas you can go into. I guess the biggest tip would be to do some research or reach out to people that can explain a little bit better what those careers look like, because a lot of people don't realize that's open to them. So, if you have very specific questions, you can always reach out to Leslie and myself, and we can talk through that with you.
Great. Thank you, Jeremiah. And Rebecca, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering a little bit about the platforms that you use to advertise. I assume it's probably different for the different clients that you work with or the different brands, but I was just wondering a little bit more about where you place your advertisements and what that looks like.
Yeah, no, that's a, it's definitely an evolvement, because I will say that when I first moved into advertising from the traditional world of consumer, I was wondering where all the digital was. And it was very, you think about, especially HCP, you think about the clinician and physician, most people were getting their information, if not from their doctor or nurse, but from things that, takeaways that you find in the office, whether they be pamphlets or brochures or something that might be in a magazine or a lot of print. And it was, advertising in healthcare was a little bit slow to the game. But I would say that this is another thing that COVID really did, was it accelerated the use of digital in how we are communicating with our patients. So I think just like any other form of media, whether it's print or your TV or your website or a radio spot or a out-of-home billboard. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's wherever you ingest your media on anything else, you'll find it in any kind of pharma and healthcare as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Leslie. I think we had a question from Carolina. Carolina?
Yes, thank you so much for giving me quite a bit of airtime this evening. I really appreciate all of you. I'm curious, following up on what was Martina asked, I recently learned about pharmacy benefit organizations pharmacy benefit management. And I learned that, CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, and then two others dominate the market. And so they basically control the price of drugs. And I was surprised to learn that there's some pharmaceutical companies that actually sell some of their prescription drugs like at very affordable wholesale prices, but then the pharmacy benefit management companies will multiply the price that they sell it at by even 10 to 20, 30%, which makes it very expensive for the consumer. And so from a branding standpoint, I'm just wondering if Havas Health has been tasked with addressing that discrepancy, which makes the pharmaceutical company look bad, when in reality, they're not responsible for the increase in price that the consumer is paying. In some cases, not in all, but in a lot of cases, that's the case.
Well, that's a pretty deep question.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
I don't know if I can just blurt that one out. That's a really interesting question.
I mean, one thing
ahead.
I can say is, so within our organization, so Leslie and I, we support about 25 different agencies across North America, and they all have, a lot of them are very similar, but some are specialized. And one of them that's specialized is in market access and managed markets. And what they do is they work with the pharmaceutical companies to help get their brand onto the list. So okay. So you need a diabetes drug, right? There's a lot of diabetes drugs out there, but your insurance company will only pay for certain diabetes drugs for some reason, because that's what they do. It's an insurance company. So what our company does is we try to work to get, the best of the diabetes drugs, which some often are our clients, onto that list. So what we're trying to do, so we work with the pharmaceutical companies, we work with the insurance companies, and I guess we have to work with the pharmacies. And we try to, while we can't control the pricing model, we can try to influence what the best drugs are and get them available to the most people. And we hope that, the powers of the pharmaceutical companies could try to rein in the spending. But other than that, I don't think we can really control what, in a free market, what CVS wants to charge, especially if your insurance company is willing to pay it. So I don't know. I don't have an answer for that specific thing.
Thank you. And when you say influence, you're using that, I'm assuming you're using branding levers to influence, or what specifically are
It's
you?
the science. I think it's the science behind it, right? It's how, how does the drug react? What is it? Why is this drug better? Does this drug take, do you have to take one pill 2 times a day? Or can you take, one injection every week, right? What's better for the individual? What's the better science? What has a better rate of helping and impacting the person? So that's what we go off of, the science. It's not necessarily because they're paying us more. It's because of how well the drug does.
And there's so many stakeholders to keep into consideration when you're developing strategy for your clients and your brands. So we can
Absolutely.
appreciate that. That's definitely something that we do talk about in other courses in our program in the U.S. healthcare system, or health communication principles and strategies. And many of our courses touch on, stakeholders and positioning and marketing and digital marketing and writing. So a great answers. Any other questions? I think we had one more.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to say one more thing that, since COVID is a very big topic tonight and just in general, COVID really did an interesting, it really kind of brought to light of when the doctor, and I'll just use doctor, the clinician became the patient. And it was the first time in at least my history of being able to have your physician that's trying to help you get better, and they're also being affected and impacted. So the way that the science is developing and having doctors and nurses and clinicians buy in is they have to be very mindful that this is, we talk about the money side of it. Well, yes, it's a business, but there's a lot of doctors that they want answers, and they want fair answers, not just from them, for their patients, but for themselves. So I think that this has really opened up a much stronger conversation on ethics and affordability, and being able to make these drugs and treatments so more readily available, whether it goes under a generic no branded name. That's the same thing that you're getting, when you think about, there's big names out there like Prozac. Well, the pharma industry has been able to create very many different versions of Prozac under different names to be able to give the same treatment and affordability. And so I think that having the healthcare provider very much in the conversation of not just our health, but their health has really kind of elevated the attention of the pharma industries to be a lot more clear and concise on how they want their product to be talked about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, I mean, we seem to have, as you put it earlier, a spotlight was shown on the work of health communicators, marketers, and advertisers after COVID. I think from my perspective, pre-COVID, I would have to explain sometimes to people what health communications is and what we do. Not now. I think it's pretty clear what we do and the value that we add and what we bring. How do you guys see the job market for health communicators now? I mean, has there been a shift since COVID? Are you seeing more applicants? Or do you have more openings? Any changes?
We're busy. I mean, we are always busy, and our team will be handling at any given time over 500 open roles across the board. I would say that, when you talk about going into a career of, I think about, like consumer, and it's to work on big products and to work on cars and just phones and stuff is definitely enticing. But what's happened that has shifted in the market is just the way we get our media. And when you think about something as simple as Instagram and influencers, you have somebody that goes on, I was making a joke earlier to our first speaker about Taco Bell, how Pete Davidson started talking about Taco Bell for breakfast, and all of a sudden everyone's running to Taco Bell to eat the breakfast. And you don't need a big, giant millions of dollar budget campaign to get people to eat Taco Bell. However, with healthcare, you need people that are going to be able to tell the story properly. You need scientists, and you need people that understand regulation and understand how the FDA works, and making sure that the legal system that we have sort of infiltrated in healthcare is on a nonstop basis. So it is booming. I don't see it stopping anytime soon. I would say that if you're looking to go into marketing and advertising and you want a steady, stable career that pays well, yes, it's something that I'm going to knock on wood here right now, but it's, everyone's talking about the recession, and we're kind of glancing at those conversations. Then we come back to the reality of how busy we are.
Martina Nikolova.
Yes, so a bit more of an administrative question, but still staying on the same topic to you as talent acquisition experts. What is your stance as a company on remote team members and remote working? Do you see it as something that could be effective and efficient?
I mean, it really depends on, at least within our organization, it depends. Everybody was remote, for two some years, and we were very successful. In fact, we had one of our best years ever, right in the middle of the pandemic, and we did great. However, over the last year or so, we've moved to a hybrid model, and the reason behind that is we're a creative, collaborative industry, and you get a lot of collaboration when you're in person with people. You can still work with Teams and Zoom, and it does work, but once you're there in the office or wherever you're at with your team and the culture, and you're vibing off of each other, we find that a lot of great creativity comes out of that. So we're in a 2-day hybrid, and it's working pretty well.
Yeah, I also think that there are certain disciplines there that we actually are okay with, like editorial and medical writing. Those are very head down positions, and they need a lot of attention. So that's an area that if somebody wants to be 100% remote, it's usually allowed. But I agree with Jeremiah. One of the things that was the most challenging for a lot of people that started their jobs during the pandemic, their first jobs, working for a company and never stepping foot in an office. And it was very isolating. And it was, you could have so many Zoom and Teams happy hours and, gatherings and on, making jokes about, the Wi-Fi or the, being on mute and all that kind of stuff. But we have found that 2 days a week and it's pretty flexible, how you work with your team, and then having the ability to work from home the rest of the week has just been, people have just gotten, I think they're excited. And we also had a lot of companies that we've competed with who had said right out of the gate that they were staying remote forever. And, people were really excited until they weren't. And so we've seen in the last 6 months, we've had so many people reach out and just say, saying, I just need to go into an office. I just need to have a commute. I need to have something to look forward to outside of wherever your 4 walls are. So will remote stay? Well, will we have, days working from home in other places? Absolutely. I don't think that we will ever go back to being in the office more than 2 days a week. But like Jeremiah said, for us, the hybrid model really works well.
Thank you so much. I see.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I just put it in the chat. I'm just really curious. I love the work that you're doing. And I'm just wondering if there's like a, favorite advertising book that you all read, or favorite like health communications book you all read, or just favorite book, nonfiction or fiction, that you'll read.
I mean, I don't know. There's so many out there. I mean, our team, which is about, we have 20 some people on our talent acquisition team, but we usually meet once a week. And after we talk about sort of like, day-to-day housekeeping, we all talk about what we like to watch on Netflix and what movies are out there, and what we have a kind of a book club. So I think that I'm sure there's a lot of books, and I'm sure I can come back with some that are the favorites. But I think that, to me, like books that are usually written on a topic, unless you work in that field and you're kind of experiencing it day to day, you're not going to really glean out of a how-to book or a marketing book, at least in my opinion, than you will having the experience of just being in an office or being in that kind of environment.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess that would be actually the cooler question. What is your favorite? What's the latest Netflix or
Oh my
podcast?
God, I know. We're always yelling at each other because, especially when you were able to binge something and you're like, I need something. So let's see, what are some of the latest? Well, we're all watching, this isn't Netflix, but we're watching The Last of Us, which has been really incredible. I mean, I think, during the pandemic, there was so many shows that I can't even begin to count, The Queen's
I know.
Gambit.
I'm
And
trying to think back on a couple.
I know.
We put a list together.
I know we actually have an archive list that we go to all the time for that. And it's, I would say also, one of the things that this doesn't have to relate to this, but I did want to point out, I don't know if Lee, you had talked about this, but we have a really amazing fellowship program. This is for grads, and it's kind of like, unless you go to a school like Northeastern, it's kind of like your 5th year of college, except you're being paid a salary with full benefits and vacation and all that kind of stuff. But it's a really cool way. We offer fellowships to, Jeremiah, is it 3 times a year, 3 cohorts?
Yeah, we have 3 cohorts. Yeah.
3 cohorts. And it's so February, June, and September. Yeah. But everything that you saw on that earlier screen, the different departments and capabilities, whether it's creative or whether it's account or strategy and planning or project management or medical, you come in and you're paid a really decent salary to learn. And then you're working with a whole bunch of other students in different, variables of work. And it's a very best in class program that Donna Murphy, our CEO, it was her passion project. And we really try to make it accessible to all students. We don't go after Ivy Leagues. We go after people that want to work in healthcare. And with the hope of having you reach the 9-month mark of being able to say, yes, we'd like to convert you into a full-time employee. So, it's a really great way to start your career with working in real time with people that do this for a living. So, I mean, it's a really great mentorship and it just, intensive information that's handed to you from some of the most seasoned professionals.
And it's primarily in New York, but we also have offices in Boston, Chicago, Toronto, San Francisco,
Miami.
I'm missing 1 or 2, but those are the main ones.
Well, you guys are everywhere, and we're lucky to have you both with us tonight. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights, and additional professional insights on industry matters, and just giving our students an idea of the kinds of opportunities that are there. And it seems to me as though hiring is still happening, and there are many opportunities. So I hope this was inspiring for you all. And Carolina, this is what I'm reading right now, The Long Haul. So,
Which, yes, I will say that I made a mark of that when we first met earlier today, because I definitely am going to, that's going to be my next read.
oh, it's worth it. It's inspiring. So I want to just thank you all again. Thank you to our speakers, Jeremiah and Leslie. Thank you so much for the passion that you have for the work that you do. We are grateful to you all and for your time tonight, everyone. Thank you so much. Be well and good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.